Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel, and welcome. What an absolutely wild week of college football we just had. Five of the top 11 teams going down, another top 25 team going down. It was just an absolutely insane week. Maybe one of the craziest weeks, if not the craziest week of college football I have ever seen in my life. Now, if you like college football and you like this kind of content, make sure to go on YouTube, like and subscribe, Spotify, Twitter, all of that stuff, and go find me there. But without further ado, let's get into the list this week. First off, I would like to say I'm a little sick, so if you hear some sniffling and coughing, that's my bad. I will do my best to limit that. But secondly, uh, last week I did not put Alabama number one. The reason I did not put Alabama number one last week was because I thought they almost sold it at the end of the game. I thought if Georgia had, I don't know, maybe 3 minutes left of gameplay extra to play with, I think they would have won. But that being said, they didn't win, and I still put Alabama two, but I did not think they were better than Texas. And it looks like I was correct on that because number one is remaining Texas. Now, they didn't play a game this week, but maybe it was a really good thing that they didn't play a game this week because there were a lot of teams that went down. They get they get Georgia in 2 weeks, which is going to be a very, very tough matchup. And that will definitely be a much bigger tell because Texas right now is the only undefeated team left in the country in the SEC. Sorry, not in the country, in the SEC. They are right now the favorites to win, although with everything that's happening, who knows? I think that Texas being as deep as they are probably gives them a slight advantage, but look, Alabama lost to Vandy. Anything can happen. I'm not, and I think this is very good having some parity in the sport. Maybe we aren't quite sure what this top 12 teams or top 11 plus a group of five team are going to actually look like. Um, but either way, Texas didn't have a game this week, but Ewers is expected to come back, and when they play Georgia, you best believe I'll be watching that. Speaking of big matchups, Ohio State beat Iowa 35-7, about what we expected. Now that they finally played a Power Four program, well, they played Michigan State, but a better Power Four program. We're definitely getting reminded like why Ohio State was so high. Honestly, I wanted to keep Ohio State two last week, but I could not justify keeping them above Alabama, who had just beaten Georgia, even though in my heart of hearts I thought Ohio State's probably better. And again, who knows? They just played their first formidable opponent of the season. Um, that being said, this week Ohio State has Oregon, which is going to be that is going to be quite the battle. Oregon is finally looking like the Oregon that we hoped and thought they would be. And if Ohio State can play exactly like how we expect them to play, they should run right through them, and we should honestly get. Oh, and it will be very clear that the two best teams in the country are Ohio State and Texas. Number three, team that has finally cracked the top five, even though maybe you could say they've been deserving of it. That would be Penn State. They took the W against UCLA 27-11. Uh, it is just coming to my attention that Penn State is not built for these these just absolute blowouts. Um, well, I think that they have a very, very good team, especially under Andy Kotelnicki, the new offense in their new offense. I think that we're just not going to see them, Ohio State teams. Now, Penn State, I think, is in the best position they've been in probably the last 15 years to play Ohio State. Uh, but before they can do that, they get USC this week, a team that, while they did drop out of the top 25, spoiler alert, are still a very, very talented Trojan team. And I think that to underestimate them would be a grave mistake. And they probably match up better with Penn State than they do against a lot of these teams they already lost to. I mean, that being said, though, Penn State does have one of the best running back tandems in Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. So if they, if they somehow shut down Drew Aller, if Drew Aller is struggling, they can always go to two players who are more than capable of rushing for 100 yards. Number four, the aforementioned Ohio State matchup, the Oregon Ducks. They took down Michigan State 31-10. Similar final score, similar final score to what Ohio State did to him. Look, Dylan Gabriel is going to have to limit these turnovers. I watched him play against UCLA a couple weeks ago. Even Dylan Gabriel this week threw a couple picks. They are just not going to be able to beat a team like Ohio State if they are not going to be able to if they're going to turn the ball over that much. They're going to have to play damn near perfect unless if they're going to be able to come out of this one unscathed. Look, we've seen like I said, we've seen teams rise and fall this year so much already. But I think Ohio State, I fear they may just be a little different. That being said, Oregon's still playing their best football to date, and they keep getting better and better each week. And maybe these close scares were these close calls in the beginning of the year were good. We're pretty good for them. Good for Dan Lanning's squad, but until now, that's a game that is circled right on the calendar. That will be on and playing. Number 5, Georgia. The Georgia Bulldogs took down Auburn 31-13. They finally look back to themselves after the last two of their games where they barely got away from Kentucky, and then they, threw one away against Bama. Georgia would have probably beaten Alabama given one more quarter in this game. And I know that team wants another shot at Alabama. Now, will they get it? Because will either of them find themselves in Atlanta? Maybe, maybe not. Without divisions in the SEC this year, you can't just, Georgia can't just cruise to the championship by beating the Western Conference. They have to actually, win and play well. Now, a singular loss to Alabama is pretty forgivable. We'll see if, Tennessee, actually everyone else has at least one loss. So if they win out, if Bama drops one more, we could definitely see Georgia be playing Texas. And if Georgia beats Texas, I mean, all bets are off. Everything is up for grabs. Losing to Alabama was probably the best thing that could have happened to Georgia, if I'm being quite honest with you. They are still more than capable of making the playoffs, even without, going undefeated this season. But like complacency is a killer. Like I just said, with the new playoff format, a loss might not be the worst thing in the world. But if you're just rolling teams every week, it's hard to then be, it's hard to practice like you have something to like that you're in danger of losing if you never come close. This is going to be a big test for Georgia to be able to push through some adversity that they just really haven't had to face over the last several years. Number 6, Miami. Even though they won, even though they're one of the few undefeated teams in the country, they're just not in my top 5 anymore. Look, I think Cal is a good team. I think I'm much higher on Cal than most people are. Fernando Mendoza, Jaden Ott, they're all very, very good players. That being said, Miami should be a step above, right? Miami, hey, crazy comeback. I ended up having to watch the highlights. I think my biggest regret from Saturday night was falling asleep at halftime on my couch. I then have to go back and watch the highlights and find out exactly how this happened. But I mean, this is the second week in a row, I will say, Miami has had some serious ref help. I do think that that the ball should have been marked out of bounds against Virginia Tech. I think that was the correct call. But I definitely could see a scenario where that call doesn't go their way. But at the same time, they missed a textbook man downfield. They missed a textbook targeting. I just don't see how Miami can feel really good about these last 2 wins. Now, they didn't lose. They're still the front runners for the ACC, but maybe the gap between them and the second and number 2 are just a little bit closer than we thought before. Speaking of front runners in close conferences, number 7, I may be a little high on them, but Iowa State. They walloped Baylor 43-21. I remember I turned on the game when it was 16-21 Baylor, and I was like, wow, another upset potentially today. And then Iowa State said, no, we're just kidding. And then proceeded to, destroy them. Iowa State is a scary team to play, and they get to go into Morgantown this week, another team that, since these early 2 losses, which are looking much more forgivable than before, have really been rolling. Iowa State is a team that scores the vast majority of their points in the second half of the game. Their team just it's I've heard boa constrictor used on other teams, but never for Iowa State yet. I think Iowa State is just that, like a boa constrictor. They just wear you down and wear you down and wear you down. And the experience and the age of Matt Campbell's squad is just is unbeatable at times. Um, they don't make mistakes the same way that you expect college squads to make mistakes. And that's a very, very difficult thing to overcome, especially if you're a younger team. Now, West Virginia isn't necessarily a young team. They have some from old talent too, and Neil Brown's been there for 6 or 7 years now. That being said, they're not undefeated. Iowa State is. Has Iowa State had the strength of schedule that West Virginia has? I don't think so, but it's going to be a very interesting game. That game is going to be very exciting in Morgantown. Not to mention that Rocco Beck's father, Anthony Beck, Andrew Beck, um, is getting it was a West Virginia legend is getting inducted into West Virginia Sports Hall of Fame right before the game, and West Virginia is debuting their Coal Rush uniforms. Which, if you hadn't seen those, I would go look them up. Those things are going to be sick. I'll have that game and the Ohio State Oregon game on at the same time. Number 8, Alabama. Wow. Send the goalpost down Broad Street and put it right in the river. Vanderbilt, hats off to you. First ever program top 5 ranked win. That obviously first ever number 1 overall team win. That was awesome. Everything that I've been talking about this year, Bama secondary being young, Malachi Moore, who was supposed to be that rock, losing his mind back there. It's the problems have now come about. Now, am I worried about these problems long term? No. This is a young secondary, which means that they have time to grow. They have time to be better. But I don't think this is going to be Alabama's only loss this year. Am I saying to come for Kalen DeBoer's head? No, not yet. Especially since Kalen DeBoer is not Nick Saban. Kalen DeBoer is going to be Kalen DeBoer. If you look, he hasn't had historically great seasons in either of his first couple seasons when he was at Washington or Fresno State. So it's almost expected that he's going to lose some games. Now, did we expect him to lose to the laughingstock of the SEC, Vanderbilt? No, that was a pretty insane thing to have happen. But I do think that this could be, indicative of things that may happen down the stretch, at least this year. I don't know, like, will people bring this up in a couple of years? Probably. But I don't think, especially if Kalen DeBoer gets his head on straight or gets this team's head on straight and brings in this historically great draft class, historically great recruiting class that he's projected to bring in. I think we'll really be able to evaluate him in about 3-4 years. Now, will Crimson Tide fans wait that long? And will the donors wait that long? That's to be seen. I think that would be a mistake to just start cycling through top-ranked head coaches without giving them a real chance. But as I was saying a minute ago before I got sidetracked, their defensive backs have all never played with each other before, and only one has ever actually played at Alabama. Once you get on campus, the amount of stars it took you to get there means absolutely nothing. These teams not playing cohesively. They're not playing well, and their leaders, like I said, like Malachi Moore, supposed to be a leader, not only in the secondary, but on the defense as a whole. He's pushing players' faces into the ground and throwing his mouthpiece. Hey, big props to Diego Pavia for not retaliating, for being the bigger person. What, 0-star recruit, JUCO transfer out of the New Mexico military facility school, something. I don't know. But he's quite the character right there. He sat there, he delivered some big throws, he made the plays he needed to, and frankly, Alabama looked lost. You can only big body people so long, and Vanderbilt came in. Look, sometimes you come into games and you think, you know what, we're gonna try to just make this not look like a blowout. No, Vanderbilt came in with a game plan. They said, why can't we win this? And they did. Enough about Alabama, though. I've been talking about them for a while. Number 9, Clemson. Finally cracked the top 10 again. I think part of this is because of how many top 11 teams lost this last week. But Clemson took a big win over Florida State. Now, I know Florida State hasn't been the Florida State that we thought they were going to be this year, but it's still Florida State. They still have a very high talent composite, and they're not starting DJU anymore, I believe. So Clemson looked really good. They won 29-13, and that offense is just has the ability to dump points. I would want to see them play Georgia again. I still think Georgia would come out with the win, but I think that Clemson would put up a heck of a lot of a better fight than just 3 points. Cade Klubnik is looking excellent and is, borderline talking about a Heisman watch. Is Clemson going to win the national championship? I don't think so, but Clemson absolutely, especially with how close some of these games with Miami are, could absolutely make a case against Miami, because Miami can come back against a lot of teams. But if they have one of their classic first halves where they give up the majority of their points, I don't know if they're coming back against a program like Clemson. Number 10, our second of the top losses this week, we got Tennessee losing 14-19 to Arkansas. Wow. Arkansas, again, great job. We have so many stormings this week. My apologies. And it's just awesome. Like it's what you love about college football. I've been telling people all this beginning of the week, this might have been the greatest weekend of college football I've ever seen in my life. 2007 is merely a tale in the wind to me. I've heard of it. I never got to experience it. But this was a heck of a week. Look, Arkansas kept it close. They made Nico Iamaleava really uncomfortable. Frankly, I thought they kind of screwed themselves in the going into halftime up 3. I thought Tennessee was going to come out with a much better game plan. I think that Nico's age is showing a little bit. I think the fact that he's really, really young is a little bit of a problem. We'll talk about that in a second. But Arkansas's ability to just, stand in and deliver very, very good football is awesome. I mean, just starting the second half, Dylan Sampson goes out for a 50-something yard run, nearly makes it in the end zone on like the third play of the half. I thought right there, I told someone I was with, I was like, that's it. The game is over, right? I expected Tennessee after that to run away with it. I expected Arkansas to start panicking, but props to them. Great job, right? Arkansas decided to win this game, and Nico just did not play, Heisman level ball like I think we're expecting him to. That's a little bit on our expectations, right? We put expectations among this 19-year-old kid to perform like one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, despite the fact that he's a super young quarterback. That being said, he made his mistakes, right? He was holding the ball way too long in that play to end the game where he just ran out of bounds. Like, dude, you can't run it. Fire it into the end zone, throw a pick, do something, but you can't run it. There's no time on the clock. Just put it into the end zone somehow, right? By running it out, you completely lose all possibility of winning the game. Great game from start to finish. Loved watching it. And look, I still think Tennessee is a great program. Again, complacency is a killer. Same thing with Georgia. Sometimes a loss is a good thing. Look, Taylon Green from Arkansas has been playing his butt off too. He's like top 10 in passing and top 10 in rushing. He's playing like the Lamar Jackson of college football right now. And it's pretty cool to see. Number 11, falling out of the top 10. You can still make a case for him very much in the top 10, but that'd be Ole Miss. They had a pretty big win over South Carolina this week, 27-3. I think it's kind of funny looking at that circle. South Carolina blew out Kentucky at home in the beginning of the year. Kentucky then beats Ole Miss by 3, and then Ole Miss goes and blows out South Carolina. So it's just showing you anything can happen on a college football game day. Ole Miss looked incredible this week. Their defense was back into form. They looked like the Ole Miss that we kind of expected to see day in and day out, and the one that we thought, had a chance to win the SEC. Now, with Georgia's difficulty of schedule heading forward, with the fact that all but one team have at least one loss on the year, hey, it's very possible that Ole Miss can find themselves in Atlanta in the SEC championship later on. But before we can think about that, we got to think about LSU next week, which brings us to number 12, LSU, who didn't play a game this week. We'll kind of talk about this Ole Miss and LSU team at the same time. So on one side of the ball, Ole Miss, their offense, Trey Harris leading the SEC in receiving yards, one of the best wide receivers in football. LSU has a lot of very talented wide receivers, but none who have really broken out as that number one yet. Right, Zaire Thomas, Caden Lacey, very good wide receivers, but a little immature and not sure how they're actually like going to stack up against really good SEC competition. Now on the defensive side of the ball, that's where I think there's a huge separation. Now, I think Jackson Dart is much better than Garrett Nussmeier. I just don't. I haven't ever been that high on Garrett Nussmeier. He makes some big throws sometimes, but he also throws a lot of interceptions. He's been very overturny prone to overturns this entire year. And that's really going to come back to bite you against a team like Ole Miss. If you remember last year, that was a shootout. That game, it had like over 100 total points scored. It was just we just watched Jaden Daniels and Jackson Dart just slinging it back and forth and back and forth for what seemed like an eternity. It was a really fun game to watch. It was sick, but LSU's not winning that this year. And I don't think that LSU has the firepower this year to compete with an Ole Miss team, especially one that already took their loss. Remember, complacency is a killer. You can't be complacent when you're losing games. Lane Kiffin, I think, got this team right, and I think that Ole Miss is going to go on a pretty solid run. And I think their first victim is going to be LSU. Now, LSU's defense has looked better in recent games, but not against Ole Miss level offense, and even against lesser offenses like USC. They've really struggled. Again, I think this team has been playing very immaturely, and I think the lack of maturity could also come back to bite them in later games. I think Trey Harris and other players on that team could very much get in their heads, and if they play this mind game, I don't see LSU winning. Number 13, BYU, what the second undefeated team in the Big 12, because we only got like 12 or 14 of them left. Um, overall, overall undefeated teams. Jake Retzlaff is playing out of his mind right now. He still has a little bit of a turnover problem, but look, they destroyed K-State. They are, undefeated. And as of now, looking to host Arizona this week. If Arizona's not ranked anymore, if they overlook it, they overlook it, and that's their fault. But I don't really see that happening. If that makes sense. They're playing ball with a purpose right now, and I just don't see there. It doesn't seem to matter who their opponent is. It's what seems to matter is just win each rep, and that's the way you should be playing football. BYU doesn't seem like a team that can be complacent at this point, and if that's how it's going to go, it's going to take really, it might be a little out of their hands, but they can absolutely not out of their hands. They could definitely win the Big 12. It seems so wide open this year between injuries and how they're playing super surprisingly. And maybe, it's really between them and Iowa State right now. So we'll see how that all turns out. Number 14, a team that's slowly been creeping themselves back up, but that's Notre Dame. They didn't have a game this week, but they're coming off of a huge win against Louisville, and they're going to continue next week against Stanford. Riley Leonard continues to improve with each game he plays. And I have no doubt that he spent, no doubt. I don't know. I don't know Riley Leonard, but I'm hoping, that they end up, they come in prepared for this Stanford game. Stanford is a underrated team, I believe. I don't think that they're necessarily an easy team to shoo away. But I don't think they're as good as Louisville. And Notre Dame, I think, is better for their loss. And look, if they could continue to roll and they beat some better teams this year, I mean, they got some teams that are on the up and coming on their schedule. If they win out, I could definitely see them making a valid case and potentially getting in via committee votes to the college football playoff. Notre Dame still has plenty to fight for right now. And look, a lot of losses have happened. Much more can happen. Number 15, a team that is just so hard not to get excited about, but that's Boise State. destroying Utah State 62-30. Ashton Genty is unreal. Have you guys seen those there's like memes on Instagram where it's like he's standing like Michael Myers in the bathroom, he's just in the backfield. He's just standing there straight up, and then all of a sudden he puts the craziest move on you've ever seen and runs 60 yards for a touchdown. I mean, first time he touched the ball, 60 something yards to the house. Another 70 something yard run later. The only games he hasn't rushed for over 200 yards or 200 yards or more are the ones that he's only played till half, and he has a combined 300 yards in those two games. He is on a generational run and should absolutely win the Heisman right now. There's not a person playing even remotely as good a football as he is right now. Number 16, Indiana, another team that obviously very surprising, but hey, first bowl appearance is 2020, I think I read. They put a beating on Northwestern 41-24. Indiana isn't just winning games right now. They're blowing teams out. They blew out Maryland the week earlier. They blew out some other teams throughout the year. I think that Indiana under Curt Cignetti is going to be a juggernaut in just a couple years. One of those teams that's, we're preseason ranking in the top 10. Curtis Rourke, despite the fact that he's not playing, insanely well, is still like, his veteran presence as like, as being able to bounce back from these from bad plays has just been incredible. And I think that I don't know what Curt Cignetti does because he won at JMU and now he's winning here. He's, I think, the third winningest active coach in college football right now, which is insane because he just took over Indiana and he's yet to lose there. Indiana has absolutely a big chance to make a bowl game. I think it would be very surprising if they made the playoff, but if they keep winning, I don't see how you could deny it to them. Number 17, Utah. It makes me sad talking about Utah sometimes. They didn't have a game this week. The only reason it makes me sad is because what could have been, right? John Whittingham with Cam Rising. I think I've said this before, but when John Whittingham has gotten to coach Cam Rising for an entire season, 100% of the time that has happened, they have won their conference. Now, that's only been once, but they beat Caleb Williams Heisman year USC twice that season, including, that Rose Bowl win. They got some other meaningful bowl games, and I think if Cam Rising is back, Utah is at the top right now, and we're thinking, oh, could Iowa State take them down? Could any team take them down? Because I think they would just be much better than what they're being right now. They're not winning games confidently. Isaac Wilson is just not the same dynamic playmaker as Cam Rising, and I think that if Utah can get him back, it's not they're not out of it yet, but it's just not totally in their hands anymore. And now, number 18, a team that I have notoriously not been super high on. And then I got higher on after Weigman was benched, but then he came back and I was like, oh, here we go. Is Texas A&M? You didn't figure out by the Connor Weigman reference, who just walloped, destroyed, annihilated, whatever adjective you want to use. That's what they did to Missouri. 41-10. That is disgusting. It was 35-0 at one point. Missouri just might not be that good. They only have one loss this year. Now Texas A&M only has one loss this year. Another team that could very quietly find themselves sneak back up to the top. But Texas A&M looked really, really good. Le'Veon Moss is a sick name for a running back. And I think that, if he can continue to at the level of production that he's producing, if Connor Weigman, if this wasn't just a flash in the pan and he's actually going to be this good the whole year, I don't see why Texas A&M can't make, a crazy, season comeback after we kind of counted them out after just that singular loss to Notre Dame in the beginning of the season. Number 19, Kansas State. Kansas State did not have a game this week. They lost 2 spots, but that wasn't really because they did that poorly. After they got beaten bad by BYU, I wasn't super high on them. But BYU is a fairly forgivable loss considering the Cougars are now undefeated and sitting at the top of the Big 12. But the top of the Big 12 isn't that high, right? K-State still only has one loss. BYU is very toppable. Iowa State is very toppleable. Kansas State could absolutely still make a run at this thing. I think that Avery Johnson, his inconsistency concerns me because I don't think he's going to. He just hasn't shown up in every game this year. But even if he doesn't, the rest of the team is still pretty talented. Dylan Edwards, both running the ball and returning. The defense is very stout. It's also a more experienced team, kind of outside of Avery Johnson. And I think that this team could absolutely still be very much in contention. Now, a team that I don't really think is in contention anymore, despite the fact that they only lost, by one, only lost one game, is the team I just talked about, is Missouri. That was embarrassing. I mean, I said before that they have the top end talent. They have the top end talent to compete with literally anyone in the country. Is my concern was more when they were going to deal with injuries. But I mean, looking at what they did last year and looking at them this year, they look like a completely different team. Even like Brady Cook, he hasn't been accurate or decisive, and their defense has looked like Swiss cheese. I think that this team is destined for okay bowl game. Music City Bowl. That sounds like Missouri to me. Um, all in all, Brady Cook and Luther Burden, if they get right, they could get hot enough to beat almost any team in the country. I just don't see them now making it that far. They might just not be that good of a team. Kind of wanted them to be. They got some fun jerseys, they got some fun players, but it is not always meant to be that way. Speaking of some teams that, despite only having one loss, I'm just not super high on, is Oklahoma. They don't have a game this week, but you best believe they're going to play their best football of the season. The Red River Showdown comes in, comes to town. Number one Texas and number one Tennessee, number 21 Oklahoma face each other in the Red River Showdown this week. And look, Oklahoma has only lost to one team, right? They've only lost to Tennessee. Texas hasn't lost to any, but they could absolutely ruin each other's seasons. Oklahoma was supposedly significantly worse last year. Guess what they did? They took down Texas. Every team, one thing I learned this week is every team is toppleable. And if Texas doesn't bring their A game, if they're too focused on Georgia the next week, they're gonna choke and lose. Whether they have Jackson Arnold back there or Michael Hawkins. I think that Oklahoma, if they're ever going to make a statement, it's going to have to be this week. If Oklahoma goes in there and gets blown out, they can play Mizzou in the Music City Bowl, right? They'll just be kind of sitting there in the middle, might make the playoff if a bunch of teams really bad lose, probably won't make the playoff. Just we'll see. But if Oklahoma wins this game, that could absolutely jumpstart their season in a way that we just have not seen happen for a little bit now. Number 22, Southern Methodist, another new team, basically replacing Louisville on this list, right? They're 5-1 and with a very forgivable week one loss to a Nevada team that really isn't bad. But they beat Louisville 34-27 this week. Kevin Jennings taking over at quarterback for Preston Stone is crazy. They got and after, I mean, look, I'll say I fell into the trap. After Southern Methodist got absolutely blown out by Boston College last season, I was like, oh, congratulations, you're just going to be the bottom of the barrel of the ACC. But they're kind of actually contenders right now. They don't have a lot of teams on their schedule still that I'm like, oh, they're gonna lose that game. If SMU ends the season, 11-1, they're probably competing in an ACC championship. I just don't see enough teams finishing that well. I mean, that would be an undefeated conference play, and if any other teams lose at this point, they're going to be losing conference games. So watch out for SMU quietly and slowly moving their way up the ladder. Michigan. I was so excited for them. This is now turned into like early season Clemson for me, where Michigan is just, they now are sitting with 2 losses, the only 2-loss team in the top 25. And frankly, if they didn't win the national title last year, they might be out of it because this was a bad game. Jack Tuttle, QB3 for the season, comes in, and I'm like, oh, a couple really, really good drives. throws a touchdown. I'm like, okay, they found themselves a quarterback. Good job, everybody. Give yourselves a little pat on the back. And then the problems start happening. Uh, they just look just as hopeless as they did before on offense, and their defense just starts playing poorly, right? Look, Will Rogers, not a bad quarterback. Jed Fish, great head coach. I did not expect Washington to come in and win this game. I don't really think anyone did, especially after they lost to Rutgers. But Michigan is going to have a couple down seasons. I'm sorry, Wolverine fans, but we're just not really there yet. I don't think. Again, you're just not the rapid reload kind of team that Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, I guess is. Ohio State was kind of a low blow. Tied at 24, second week in a row. I'm doing a tie. The Army Black Knights and the Navy Midshipmen. Army beat Tulsa 49-7. Navy beat Air Force 34-7. They are both playing crazy good football. Right now, they're on pace to play in the AAC championship against each other a week before the game, which could have playoff implications. Playoff implications. This could be a crazy, crazy game situation throughout the whole year. I couldn't decide which one should be higher. If I had to give an edge to a team right now, it'd probably be Army. But Navy is playing like a more significant style of football. I mean, Udo on Army is technically a fullback, but has been rushing for 100 yards a game. Um, their quarterback has been playing out of his mind. Navy has actually been throwing the ball way better than I thought they would be. And Army is actually being able to run a true triple option type system because their quarterback has been throwing much better. Bryson Daly. So at this point, both teams really excite me. And for the Army Navy game to have playoff implications, we're still a long way from that, but it's fun to think of. To round it out, the Pitt Panthers, who are also undefeated, take the 25th list. Eli Holstein and Desmond Reed have been playing crazy good. Desmond Reed, especially in the pass game, taking screen passes, taking short passes, even running some deeper routes at running back has been an absolutely nuts situation to be seeing in Pittsburgh. It pains me as a West Virginia guy to put them in the top 25 and to leave my guys out, but hey, they beat us in the beginning of the season. And honestly, the better that Pitt looks, the better West Virginia, the more forgivable the loss seems later in the season. That being said, Pitt is 5-0. Kind of a similar thing if we're not careful. They play SMU in a few weeks, so that game could have crazy playoff implications. They get Cal, I believe, this upcoming week. Let's see, they get Cal. Yep, they're hosting Cal, a team that almost knocked off Miami this upcoming week, this past week. They have a very interesting schedule ahead of them, and it'll be exciting to watch. Honorable mentions: Illinois, Nebraska, Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Duke, USC, Iowa, Cal, UNLV, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. Do I actually think Vanderbilt's a top 25 team? No, not really at all. But what I do think is that Vanderbilt just took down number 1 Alabama, number 2 in the A to Z poll, but number 1 in the AP poll, Alabama. That's something, right? You get some sort of recognition for that. My Heisman watch right now. Number 1, I've already said this in this time, Ashton Jeanty. Just look at that guy play, and then you blink and he's in the end zone. Travis Hunter, it's hard to have a touchdown to interception ratio as not a quarterback, but this guy's got one, and he's stacking them on both sides. He just had a couple weeks ago his first 900-yard receiving game, and oh my God, he only put up 92 yards. Number 3, Cam Ward. I was ready to drop him off this list if he couldn't make that comeback, and holy smokes, he did. I fell asleep that night dreaming of Heisman lists where he was barely in the top 5, and look at it now. Number 4, Jalen Milroe. Despite this loss to Vanderbilt, I think we're going to look back at this Georgia game. We're going to look back at a lot of other games, and I don't think that the Heisman voters are going to care that much that he looked poor in the second. He looked poorly in the second half of the Georgia game, or the fact that he got sacked so many times in the Vanderbilt game, because I think they're just going to not say that that's his fault. And the cough SEC bias there is going to make it hard for Ashton Jeanty, Travis Hunter, Cam Ward to really make a case for it. But That's why Jalen Milroe is number 4 for me. And finally, number 5, kind of a wild card here, a little bit out of left field, just because I'm not a huge fan of really any of the other quarterbacks on this list. Caleb Johnson, the running back from Iowa. Do I really think he has a shot over Ashton Genty? Probably not, unless something were to happen, God willing, um, or God forbid. But Caleb Johnson's been playing some very, very good football, and arguably, I mean, in my books, the second best running back in the in Power Five football right now, Power Four football right now. This week, you're gonna want to sit down and watch Washington, Iowa, Texas, Oklahoma, Penn State, USC, Cal, Pitt, Arizona, BYU, Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, LSU, and K State, Colorado. Those are my games of the week. Next week, stay tuned. Next week, we're gonna have a special episode. Uh, we're gonna have a guest speaker on here, and we're gonna talk about some of the hot topics. We're not just gonna go through a list that time. We're gonna go through some Heisman stuff, some games that are games of the week, maybe some stuff we're excited for, a whole bunch of stuff. So make sure you stay and listen to that. Make sure you like and subscribe anywhere that you are listening to this. You can follow on Twitter. You can follow on Facebook at Zach_Siegel32 for Twitter, and you can just look up the A to Z Poll podcast on YouTube. That being said, I hope everyone has a great week, and I hope you watch some football, and I hope your team wins.